Friends, Kadyrov has embarrassed himself on camera again, while Zelenskyy has named the time frame when the war in Ukraine could end and has appointed Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya as the president of Belarus. China is slapping Putin on the wrist. Xi Jinping is against the shelling of Kyiv. At the same time, Duma Speaker Volodin is officially threatening Ukraine with a nuclear strike. Hello, this is the Pritsele Project. I'm Vladimir Timoshenko. Let's begin. So shall we begin then? You surely know what we're starting with the Chechen disgrace by the name of Kadyrov. He just started advertising an energy drink. You think I'm joking? No, P. And this is happening while Putin isn't exactly supporting Kadyrov's candidacy in the upcoming so-called elections in Russia. Take a look at this mess. Now for our regular segment, no comments.
The very best MD-RON, the completely harmless little drone, the incredible body tracking drone, and even the energy drink drone. What exactly is this remarkable device? Ah, what a truly wonderful and versatile drone. Sumliad and Summit Pobeza drone. Dirbon.
So Dirbon. How adorable. The very best drone, the harmless drone, the body drone, or something quite like that, Kadyrov mumbled, barely able to clearly pronounce the words. Yes, that's actually him heavily promoting his son Adam's new energy drink during the recent Super Enduro Cup competition held in the region. Let me remind you, what is the ultimate irony here? It is that Kadyrov himself, back in 2013, implemented a total and complete ban on all energy drinks in Chechnya, claiming they cause uncontrollable aggression and deep depression, even comparing them to dangerous poisonous substances. And so now we see the perfect example of double standards, true Kadyrov style. But anyway, now let's talk about something truly important. Amid the growing threats of a potential new invasion from Belarus, the leader of the Belarusian Democratic Opposition, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, has arrived in Kyiv. During this visit, President Zelenskyy didn't miss the chance to cleverly troll the mustachioed war criminal Lukashenko. During his address to the participants of the 4th International Summit of Cities and Regions, Partnership, Resilience, Readiness, the President of Ukraine recalled the self-proclaimed President of Belarus. He raised him in this very specific manner to take a close look at this, as it is quite revealing and telling.
And recently, President Alexander Lukashenko said that for the leaders of both Ukraine and Belarus, it is high time for them to meet. It actually turned out interestingly. Lukashenko said this, and then Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya arrived on the scene. Glad to see you, Sviatlana.
Additionally, the publication Ukrainska Pravda reports that on the eve, President Zelenskyy met with the Servant of the People faction, during which he discussed the future prospects for ending the war and the national economy. Zelenskyy allegedly noted that in 6 months, Russia could be forced into substantive negotiations and a final end to the war. How realistic is this particular scenario, considering the current situation on the front line? That is exactly what our next detailed segment is all about.
Zelenskyy set a timeline for the end of the war's hot phase. Russia is offsetting failures by striking the rear, a new anti-record for the occupying army on the front lines. More on this in the following segment. The President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, has revealed the possible timeline for the end of the hot phase of the war. According to Olga Vasilevska-Smagliuk, a member of parliament from the Servant of the People party, the head of state spoke about this during a meeting with the faction. According to her, the president noted that there is a possibility of ending the hot phase by November, provided that security guarantees are given.
Right now, we have significant advantages on the front that we can capitalize on. The main goal is to ensure we do not give the government of the Russian Federation the opportunity to deceive and, after a short pause, recommence new hostilities, a new offensive.
In addition, Volodymyr Zelenskyy told the MPs that he is waiting to see who in Europe will now act as the moderator of the peace track. Ukraine is also expecting a delegation from the United States in the near future. At the same time, in his evening address, Zelenskyy stated that Ukraine has stabilized the front. According to him, the positions of the Ukrainian military have become stronger, Thanks to the courage,
Thanks to the courage of our people, thanks to advanced drones, various technologies of ours, precision med strikes, and our long-range sanctions, we have finally managed to stabilize the front.
we managed to stabilize the front. Meanwhile, the situation for the aggressor country at the front is deteriorating. This was stated by Michael Kaufman, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment, in an interview with New York Magazine. According to him, the way the Russian army is waging the war is yielding fewer and fewer results.
The Russian leadership was betting on constant pressure along the entire front line. Not on large-scale breakthroughs, but on intensive small operations along a wide front, aiming to exhaust Ukrainian forces and possibly cause the front to collapse. But that did not happen. And now this seems even less likely, given the adaptation of the Ukrainian military.
According to the analyst, Russia is trying to compensate for its failures at the front with strikes on the rear, and because of this, it is ramping up the production of attack drones and increasing the use of ballistic missiles. At the same time, Kaufman notes that Ukraine is in a better position than before.
In fact, it is showing better results than most observers had initially anticipated. In the fall of 2024, the situation looked quite difficult, but then the front gradually began to stabilize. The Ukrainian political leadership has a very clear understanding of the real state of affairs. And that is precisely the reason why there is no willingness to agree to unfavorable or burdensome ceasefire terms.
The analyst concluded that time is increasingly not on Russia's side. The Russians were counting either on the collapse of the Ukrainian front or on the breakdown of Western support for Ukraine. But neither of these scenarios has materialized. At the same time, the pace of Russian advances is rapidly decreasing. According to reports from the Novosti news agency, in May, Russia captured the smallest area along the front line since March 2024. According to the OSINT project Deep State, from the 1st to the 24th of May, Russia managed to capture only 35 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. At the same time, the defense forces continue to regain control over Ukrainian territories. Analysts believe that final conclusions about the scale of problems in the Russian army can be drawn by the end of June. If by the time that point is reached the pace of the offensive does not increase significantly, it will be entirely reasonable to conclude that the offensive capabilities of the Russian military have diminished to a significant degree.
So friends, now to the most important topic. You remember Putin promises to strike at decision-making centers in Kyiv. Today, for example, State Duma Speaker Volodin even decided to scare the capital of Ukraine with nuclear weapons. But at the same time, friends, pay attention. Xi Jinping, Putin's master, and at the same time the real owner of Russia, enters the game. In response to a specific inquiry, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning, while providing commentary regarding Russia's threats to launch systematic strikes on targets in Kyiv, called on all the relevant parties to refrain from further escalating the ongoing hostilities. What, in fact, is hidden behind such a convoluted wording? We will have more on this in the following segment.
Russia continues to escalate its threats not only against Ukraine but also against NATO countries. And against this backdrop, an unexpected signal came from China, the Kremlin's main international partner. Mao Ning, spokesperson for the Chinese Foreign Ministry, commenting on Russia's threats to launch new systematic strikes on Kyiv, stated that China opposes further escalation and urges both sides to return to dialogue. According to the Chinese diplomat, negotiations remain the only way to resolve the war. This statement was made immediately after Moscow effectively announced a new wave of strikes on the Ukrainian capital. The head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Sergei Lavrov, conveyed a message from Vladimir Putin through U.S. Secretary of State Mark Rubio about Russia's readiness to launch new strikes on Kyiv. But just a day later, contradictory statements began to emerge within Russia itself. The head of the State Duma Defense Committee, Andrei Kartapolov, stated that Russia supposedly does not intend to attack the Verkhovna Rada or the office of the President of Ukraine, since, according to him, they are not centers of decision-making. At the same time, the Kremlin is expanding its list of external enemies. Now, Russian officials are accusing the Baltic states of allegedly allowing Ukraine to use their airspace to carry out strikes on Russian territory. Latvia has also come under another wave of Russian propaganda attacks. Moscow claims that support for Ukrainian drone attacks is allegedly being provided through the Baltic countries. Riga has categorically rejected these accusations, emphasizing that Ukraine possesses its own long-range drones capable of striking targets on Russian territory. Experts believe that such accusations are linked to the Kremlin's attempt to explain to its own population why Ukrainian drones regularly reach the Moscow, Leningrad, Yaroslavl, and other regions of Russia. At the same time, Moscow is showing signs of preparing for a prolonged war. There has been a sharp increase in the number of mobilization orders in Russia. Citizens are being summoned to military enlistment offices under the pretext of updating their personal information, and interest in the topic of mobilization has reached record levels in search engines. In addition, Vladimir Putin has signed new benefits for those wishing to go to war against Ukraine. New contract soldiers and their families are being promised debt forgiveness of up to 10 million rubles, as well as additional social privileges. Against this backdrop, China's position is particularly telling. While the Kremlin threatens Kyiv with new strikes, accuses the Baltic states, and continues to ramp up military mobilization, Beijing is publicly calling for an end to the escalation. This is a signal that Moscow would clearly prefer not to hear.
Friends, subscribe to Union to know the truth about what is happening in Ukraine in the rest of the civilized world, and, as they say, in the abyss that is modern Putin's Russia. And by the way, speaking of the Russian abyss, do you know how the nasty little Putin is now luring his loyal Russians into the war? Well, we're about to tell you. So, the Russian dictator Putin has allowed participants in the war against Ukraine and their families not to pay off overdue loans. And by the way, for the first time, the head of the aggressor country allowed soldiers of the occupying army and their relatives not to repay overdue loans back in November 2024. So to speak, Putin is repeating himself. Now that's what you call my respects. Listen, those Kremlin elders would be better off thinking about how to defend their Kaliningrad from the EU. Cannon fodder definitely won't help them with that issue. What do I mean by that? Now pay attention, this is going to be very interesting. For the first time, a drone threat has been declared in the Kaliningrad region. But the propagandists did warn that the EU was preparing to occupy this Königsberg. But for now, it's only about drones. By the way, it could even be a Ukrainian drone, who knows? And as for the Russian war correspondents, they're honestly in shock. They write that everything is calm in Valdai, meaning Putin's residence. So there's no need to worry. The main grandpa's body is very well protected, according to their various Telegram channels. Listen, this topic really deserves a separate stream, how the Ukrainian armed forces are tearing the occupiers apart, and as for the claim that Putin's main grandpa body is protected, I definitely wouldn't jump to such conclusions. Who is Putin anyway? A KGB officer back in the Soviet Union and later an FSB agent during Yeltsin's time. So the SBU just recently struck the headquarters of the Russian FSB in the Kherson region? About 100 occupiers were killed or wounded. President Zelenskyy reported this. I think that in the near future, the main swamp FSB agent, that is Putin, might get hit too. And here are the details.
Special forces from the SBU Special Operations Center struck the Russian FSB headquarters located in Stepnohirsk in the temporarily occupied Kherson region. This was reported by President Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
The headquarters of Russian FSB personnel was hit, and a Pantsir S-1 air defense system was destroyed on our temporarily occupied territory. Thanks to this single operation alone, Russian losses amounted to about 100 occupiers killed and wounded.
Zelenskyy also published a video showing several drones simultaneously striking buildings. As the Ukrainian leader emphasized,
Russians must feel that they need to bring this war of theirs to an end. Ukrainian medium and long-range sanctions will remain in full effect.
Earlier, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, instructed the Ukrainian Defense Forces and Special Services to prepare a response to the massive Russian attack, after which drones soon attacked Moscow and the Moscow region. The President of Ukraine confirmed that the strike on the capital of the aggressor country, Russia, was carried out by Ukrainian drones. Zelenskyy emphasized that the war unleashed by Russia is gradually returning to its so-called home harbor, the Russian Federation. On May 20th, the commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces, Robert Brody, reported that Ukrainian defenders struck a drone training center in the temporarily occupied Donetsk region.
The destruction of 65 cadets and the head of the PPK Berry Center, a doctor of science at the Academy of Rocket and Artillery Sciences, has been confirmed. The number of wounded is being clarified.
The military officials specified that ammunition is detonating in the basement rooms.
So, well, the situation over there in their swamp of civilization is heating up. Bashkortostan is burning too. Military facilities, of course. So, just recently, the Intekim oil depot in the village of Kandri caught fire. That's the same Republic of Bashkortostan. All of this looks very strange because not long ago, there was an explosion at the Nurlina oil pumping station. That's in the same republic. Well, maybe there's a local sabotage group at work because it's kind of strange, you know, to explain explosion after explosion like this. Supposedly no drones have come, although who really knows? Listen, for that nasty little Putin, all this is just child's play. Here's the thing. The legendary Azov is beginning the return of their native Mariupol. What do I mean by that? Here's the point. In the first corps of the National Guard, Azov demonstrated the destruction of occupier targets near the Russian border, specifically on the Mariupol-Taganrog and Mariupol-Volnovakha highways. Verbatim. Azov plans to clear the border area around Mariupol of invaders. This is reported by the pilots of the First Corps of the National Guard of Ukraine, Azov. They are already carrying out the task of striking targets near the Russian border. And you can actually see how various military facilities and heavy equipment are burning along the Mariupol-Taganrog and Mariupol-Volnovakha highways. And there will definitely be no safe Azov region for the occupiers anymore in the future. But moreover, I want to tell you this. There are no safe places for Russian soldiers anywhere. Want some proof? Well, here you go. Here is a very telling and detailed map that we have prepared especially for you to look at today. Let's take a look at it. An updated map of strikes on Russian logistics. Look, there are more and more points. The red ones are strikes on key routes, the white ones are other mid-level strikes. That dense cluster of bright red dots located between Mariupol and the Russian border, down in the lower right corner, is mostly comprised of strikes from today's Azov video. If you are looking for even more specific details regarding these locations, here you go. Especially for you, we've prepared this very video. This is a Russian convoy destroyed by drones 100 kilometers from the front line. The logistics of the armed forces of the Russian Federation are experiencing some problems. Now it's clear why there's such hysteria about strikes on Kyiv, which the Russians are announcing, right? And at this very moment, let's talk about the most recent and significant achievements of Ukrainian drones located far within the Russian rear. Let's watch the report and draw the appropriate conclusions.
There will no longer be a safe Azov region for the Russian occupiers. The defense forces have the temporarily occupied Mariupol under fire control. Ukrainian drones are terrifying the occupation army and forcing the enemy to flee from temporarily occupied Crimea. Watch more about this in the report. The First Corps of the National Guard of Ukraine, Azov, has published a video showing targets being struck near the Russian border in the vicinity of temporarily occupied Mariupol. Ukrainian drones are successfully attacking Russian military equipment, disrupting the enemy's logistics. The footage captures combat operations on the Mariupol-Taganrog and Mariupol-Volnovakha roads. The press service of the Azov First Corps notes,
The territory of Ukraine must be free of Russian troops.
The most reliable way to achieve this is to move the security zone for hostile logistics, even closer to Russia itself and the occupied Crimea.
Earlier, pilots of the Azov First Corps of the National Guard demonstrated the operation of reconnaissance and strike systems in Mariupol and announced that they are patrolling roads up to 160 kilometers from the line of combat engagement. Strikes were carried out on the so-called Novorossiya highway. Logistics is increasingly becoming the main vulnerability of the Russian army. Even the Russians admit that the land corridor to the temporarily occupied Crimea is under Ukraine's fire control. The occupation authorities have officially restricted and limited the movement of civilian freight transport towards Crimea. On the federal highway R280, further explaining that these measures are being introduced to guarantee and maintain the safety of transit road traffic. As reported by the publication Aria Yog, with the introduction of middle strike class drones into the arsenal of the Ukrainian armed forces, there are virtually no safe routes left for Russian troops in southern Ukraine. Burning fuel trucks and destroyed military vehicles are regularly observed along key highways in the occupied territories.
Along the Melitopol bypass and at key junctions, truck drivers see charred cabins burned to the ground and massive fuel tankers torn completely in half. There is information that the occupiers have already been forbidden to move military equipment in convoys. Now they try to slip through the lines one by one. or carry military supplies for the Russian army in civilian trucks.
The defense forces are also successfully attacking their legitimate targets in the temporarily occupied territory of Crimea. And with the development of Ukrainian drone production, striking targets in the aggressor country will become even easier. As reported by Denis Tyleman, the chief designer at Firepoint, after modernization, the FP2 drone received an increased warhead, weighing 200 kilograms, and now has a strike range of up to 370 kilometers. Now this drone will be able to reach any specific target in occupied Crimea. At the same time, the defense forces continue to regain control over Ukrainian territories. As recently reported by the Ukrainian Volunteer Army spokesperson Serhiy Brachuk, the armed forces of Ukraine cleared Stepnohirsk and successfully thwarted Russian plans to shell Zaporizhzhia.
Thanks to our dedicated Special Operations Forces, particularly the Artan Special Unit of the Main Intelligence Directorate, the defense forces managed to re-establish control over Stepnohirsk and reclaim our tactical positions that had been lost there.
According to data from the Institute for the Study of War, Mala Tokmachka has also been liberated in the Zaporizhzhia region. In addition, Ukraine's defense forces have regained control over the village of Otradne in the Kharkiv region and the surrounding areas.
And here's another very telling story about how Russian military commanders are stealing from their own conscripts. Here's what I mean. Nearly $77 million worth of assets were seized from Shoigu's right-hand man. A court in a closed session confiscated the property of former First Deputy Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, Ruslan Salykov, and his family. They had their luxury apartments, plots in prestigious settlements, commercial real estate in Moscow, properties in North Ossetia, and money in their accounts seized. Salykov has already become the fourth high-ranking official from Shoigu's inner circle to be implicated in anti-corruption cases. And all this is happening against the backdrop of what's going on with Russian conscripts at the front. You know, all these stories are true about how there aren't even enough body bags to pack the dead representatives of the so-called Second Army of the world. But what is happening on the main fronts? That's exactly what our next report is about.
The armed forces of Ukraine cleared Stepnohirsk and thwarted the Russian plans to shell Zaporizhzhia. This was reported by Volunteer Army spokesperson Serhiy Brachuk. According to him, the enemy aimed to secure positions on the commanding heights to deploy heavy artillery there.
Thanks to our special forces, particularly the Artan Special Unit of the Main Intelligence Directorate, our defense forces managed to regain full control of Stepnohirsk and reclaim the tactical positions that had been lost there.
Brachuk knows that the enemy tried to counterattack Stepnohirsk but was defeated. The loss of these positions is quite painful for the Russians. The spokesperson for the Ukrainian Volunteer Army also said that the situation at the front forced the occupiers to redeploy some of their units to the Mariupol direction, where extremely intense fighting is currently taking place. Meanwhile, Ukraine's defense forces are keeping the occupiers' land corridor to temporarily occupied Crimea under fire control. As reported by the publication Aria Yug, thanks to the introduction of middle strike class drones into the Ukrainian armed forces arsenal, there are virtually no safe routes left for Russian troops in southern Ukraine. Burning fuel trucks and destroyed military vehicles are regularly observed along the key highways of the occupied territories. The article notes this.
On the Melitopol bypass and at key junctions, truck drivers frequently witness truck cabins burned to the ground and tankers ripped in half. There is information that the occupiers have already been forbidden to move military equipment in convoys. Now they try to slip through one by one or transport cargo for the Russian army in civilian trucks.
As reported by the Telegram channel Kremlin Tabakerka, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin was informed that the head of the Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, is deceiving him about the situation at the front. According to the channel's source, Putin was shown maps, satellite images, and was given data on losses. It is noted that the Kremlin leader is upset by what is happening and has ordered additional inspections.
Friends, this was the Pritzli project. I want to tell you once again, of course, subscribe to Union because it is very important to us. If you want to know what is really happening in Ukraine and in the rest of the civilized world, this was Volodymyr Tymoshenko. We will see you again soon. Goodbye.